the setup. I love the chamber music backdrop. Very nice. Hi, Mena Hanna here, General Director of Spoleto Festival USA. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our first Patron Talk of the year. First, I'd like to thank our donors, people who are signing on to this little call, this little stream. You are the folks that keep this festival going, that allow us to thrive instead of just surviving, that help us to grow this festival into an engine of public value, not just for Charleston, but for the country. This is an incredibly unusual and unique entity in the United States. It's a producing festival that is interdisciplinary. There really is nothing like this in the country. And it's thanks to you that we are able to do our work every single year. So thank you. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to talk about Jeff Nuttall. This is hard for me to talk about. So Jeff was on the hiring committee for me. And really, it's in no small part that I'm here. I'm really here because of him to a certain degree. You know, he talked to me about this position and taking this position, and I became very close to him over the last 18 months. I did come to Spoleto because I partly thought that we would be dreaming together, creating together, producing together. So to lose Jeff is very hard personally, and it's also very hard institutionally. And I hear all of your pain and sadness in losing him as well. It brings us closer together as a family. But rest assured, we will continue chamber music at the Dock, and we will honor Jeff in the 2023 festival and beyond. This festival will be a celebration of Jeff and everything that he brought to chamber music, and it's going to replicate throughout the festival period. I mean, you know, what Jeff was so good at was, you can't really institutionalize it. It's not like he was good at accessibility, or he was good at access, or he was good at innovation. Jeff was just good at making things approachable and fun. And the 22 festival, even for me, you know, it was a heavy festival. We had Omar, we had Unholy Wars, we had this small performance at Mother Emanuel. There was a lot about the 22 festival that was taking on the last several years of the pandemic and trying to understand this moment that we're in politically, socially, culturally in this country. And for me to kind of get away from the heaviness of that, I would go to chamber music for that moment of comic lightness, for that moment of just simple, pure, unadulterated joy, for that moment of just to breathe a bit. And he was so good at allowing us that exhale, allowing us to breathe, and allowing us to kind of rock on Haydn like he's a rock star and not an 18th century composer. So yeah, we'll continue to honor Jeff. But now to the topic at hand, I'm going to introduce Tim. Tim Myers is a great friend of mine. I've known Tim, I want to say over 10 years now, since 2011, something like that, when he was conducting The Rape of Lucretia at Houston Grand Opera. It's an opera by Benjamin Britten. Tim is currently the principal conductor and artistic advisor at Austin Opera. He's conducted at Santa Fe, Houston Grand Opera, San Francisco Opera, the Washington National Opera, the Wexford Opera Festival. And he's kind of one of these really incredible, unique artists that is able to take what he does in classical music, in conducting, and transcend it beyond his specific practice. And his most recent example of doing that is a podcast called Listening on Purpose, where he's interviewed so many different people about what it means to listen closely, to listen carefully, and how we can actually reintroduce listening into our daily lives so that it gives us renewed purpose and renewed meaning. In full disclosure, I was a guest on his podcast, and it was fun. It was incredible. Like it's a moment of pride for me, and I really, really enjoyed collaborating with Tim on that. So very happy to have Tim on board with us. He's going to be conducting Vanessa in the 2023 opera. It's a 2023 festival. It's an opera by Samuel Barber with a libretto by Giancarlo Menotti. Tim, welcome.
Thanks. Great to see you, Mena. Great to be with everyone there.
Great to see you too. So we'll get to Vanessa in a little bit, but first I want to ask you a little bit about your life. How did you get into conducting?
My jovial answer to that is a long series of poor decisions. But on a little bit more serious note, I grew up in central Kansas and a family with 3 siblings, and my parents were amateur musicians and wanted all of us to study piano plus another instrument. And for them, it was purely edification. They had no designs of any of us becoming professional musicians. And in fact, when some of us started leaning that way, we're fairly nervous about the idea. For me, my second instrument beyond piano was several instruments. And I would do the thing where I would just pick up an instrument, go through the method books, feel like I had an understanding of it, and then move on. My favorite other instruments that I studied were violin and cello. It turns out that ended up being really great preparation for me when I became interested in conducting much later down the road. I did my undergraduate at a small private liberal arts school in Kansas, and then went on to do my master's at Florida State University in the School of Music there. And then I had my real finishing school when I was in New York, and I became a protege of the great conductor Lorin Maazel. And that's where I really learned probably most of what I know about conducting and how the job happens, how the craft happens, and that craft being passed down from generation to generation.
Yeah, I've had the good fortune in my career of being very close to some of these major personalities in conducting.
Yes.
And I can see that so much about what conducting is kind of passed down through almost kind of like rote learning. It's not like you can effectively take a class in conducting, do a degree in it, come out the other end, and then be a world-class conductor. There is a practice, there is a craft that is handed down from generation to generation. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and what that was like with Lorin?
I think that's exactly right. And that's one of the things that I love most about it is the craft. In fact, there are often times I find myself enjoying the rehearsal process as much or more than the performances, right? Because that's where a lot of the craft takes place. It is certainly passed down. I don't actually have a degree in conducting because when I got interested in conducting, I did what I think every person in that situation does and you read the memoirs of the great conductors, biographical or autobiographical. And what I realized the most was that the great conductors all focused first and primarily on being a great musician. So I actually started auditioning for graduate programs in chamber music, accompanying, opera coaching, and that was the path that I took of sort of creating my own more European style path to the podium. And so that it really gave me the opportunity to learn a lot of repertoire, to learn how to work with singers, to learn languages. And so even though my primary interest in conducting started out on the symphonic side of things, and I still do a lot of symphonic conducting, I'm very happy that, opera came into my life in the way that it did. And then to have the opportunity to work with somebody like Maestro Mazel, and you've had the opportunity to work with someone of that generation, right, who's the same way, and there's just something that they bring to it, and the decades and decades and decades that they've had with the repertoire. And when I was working with Maestro Mazel, he would be very generous with his time. If I were going off to guest conduct somewhere, and it was a score I hadn't done before or something I wanted to review with him, he would sit down with me and go through it, or even give me a copy of his score so I could see his markings.
Mm.
But the fascinating part is when we would go through scores, we would sit on opposite sides of a table and he would go through it by heart, bar by bar. And I would be furiously scribbling notes in my score while he just went through it in a almost stream of consciousness manner of just, you could just see him playing it back in his head, and he knew everything. I mean, this was one of those people, if you gave him staff paper and said, could you write out the second clarinet part of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, he could do it.
Oh,
And so
that's
to
maddening.
have, yeah, it is maddening. I mean, but to have the opportunity to work with such a titan who was especially at a place in his life where he really wanted to pass the craft on was a life-changing experience for me.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, what's fascinating about being a conductor is that you don't actually create the sound. You're there almost to form it, to guide it. And you said earlier that you almost enjoy the rehearsal process more than you do the performing process. Tell me a little bit about that, because I think that's doubly true with opera conductors who have this new component of the drama unfolding on stage. How do you work through a rehearsal process as an opera conductor?
I think for any engagement as a conductor, it starts out feeling much like a blind date, and or a long series of them. And so you might meet a cast, and for example, I just conducted Madama Butterfly at Atlanta Opera, just finished the last performance on Sunday. And so you come, and there are a group of people, some you might have worked with, some you haven't. And so there's, first of all, this process of just getting to know each other. And that takes time and patience.
Mm.
And letting people settle into the process. And when I think about it from a leadership perspective, conducting is a very interesting craft, because you have to make space for other people, and you have to really listen very, very carefully. And that really is the biggest component of the job. The greatest conductors I've ever witnessed working were the best listeners. And so I think that
Did
holds
my wife
true.
talk to you before this meeting? Because
I know, maybe our wives have been talking.
right.
Um, but and I mean, now I'm doing a lot of work in the leadership and more corporate space about that, right?
Mm.
And like you mentioned, that the conductor is the one at the end of the performance has hopefully not made any audible sounds, but it's interesting to be in this leadership space where you have a huge impact, but you have to get there with your body language.
Mm.
And even in different performances that have different energy, and really being present to what the energy is. And maybe it's a performance where some of them are nervous and you need to settle it down, but you're not a quarterback, right? You're not you don't have a radio to talk to the race car and say, okay, we're going to do this, right? That all has to happen live in milliseconds, and for you to really bring everything together where the sum is greater than the parts. And so I love it, and I love the challenges that it brings. And it's also a very intimate, personal thing, right?
Mm.
Especially when it comes to opera, because an opera singer cannot buy a new voice. They cannot buy new vocal folds. And and it's also very much at the whim of how they're feeling on any given day. So there's this fragility to it that I think is the risk and the reward, right? The fact that what can happen in an opera performance is so incredibly magical, that I believe it's a miracle. I believe we create miracles because we're creating moments that have never existed before and will never exist again.
Mm.
And so, if you can't tell, I'm fairly obsessed with what I do.
That's pretty cool. No, of course. I mean, actually, in a sort of slightly comical, more glib tone about opera singers in particular, there was, I can't remember who wrote it, but there was a psychologist who wrote about the psychology of opera singers and sort of the psychology of the diva, so to speak. The idea that the opera diva exists in a way that you don't really see divas existing in other kinds of instruments or other kinds of sort of, artistic professions, is it's connected to the ineffability of the voice, the fact that it's inside of them, that there is so much that can impact it, from the way you wake up in the morning to, like, drinking the wrong thing before you go on performance, so on and so forth. I mean, that kind of gives opera, this is true of classical music generally speaking, but particularly so with opera, the technique has almost an athletic disposition to it. I mean, you certainly see that in Wagner and Tristan und Isolde. You see that in bel canto work. These huge sort of like crazy runs that bel canto singers have to sing in a Rossini or something like that. So I mean, to me, the athletic disposition of opera, as owning that technique, but also kind of having that athletic power, is something that I've always been kind of transfixed by.
It's something I've said this frequently. You could literally not pay me enough to be an opera singer. That's how much I respect what they do, and I respect all musicians, of course, and I love how the orchestra has its own voice in operatic performances. But I think being a singer is something that is a really special craft. And I remember when I was in graduate school, as I mentioned, I came to it from a symphonic music and chamber music side, and I knew maybe 5 arias when I arrived at graduate school. And my major professor was a really wonderful opera conductor and coach, and I learned 60 arias in my first month.
Wow.
I was spending every night, when everyone else was out having fun, either doing Italian homework or learning repertoire. And I remember, and then starting to learn how to coach singers, and so I remember one lesson going in and saying, I wonder if I would be better served by having a degree from the psychology department to do this. Which speaks to what you were saying, right? There's something deeply personal about a musician whose instrument is their own body. And as we know, it creates magical moments.
Well, speaking of psychology, I mean, I think we could, to a degree, transition to Vanessa. There is definitely something about that work. So Vanessa was composed by Samuel Barber with a libretto by Giancarlo Menotti. It premiered at the Met in 1958. Dmitri Mitropoulos conducted it. And it received its revival at Spoleto in 1978 with a staging by Giancarlo Menotti. So that's, in 2023, it'll be its 45th anniversary of the Spoleto production. We have a different production that is a female-centered production that kind of shifts the perspective really from the male gaze to the female gaze, centering Vanessa's perspective by Rodula Gaetano, the stage director. Tell me a little bit about your working relationship with Rodula. You have also some history conducting this piece. I think you worked on it at New York City Opera in 2007, 2008. Going back to it in Wexford in 2016, 2017. Tell me about your work with Vanessa and what this piece means to you.
I adore this piece. I'm absolutely thrilled to be coming back to it. This will actually be my fourth time with the piece. I assisted on it at Central City Opera in Colorado, which is a small summer opera festival in, I think 2005. I assisted on it again when I was on the conducting staff at New York City Opera, and that production was in 2007. In 2016, or for the 2016 season, I was invited to lead a production at Wexford Opera Festival, which is you've been there a few times, and it's a wonderful. It's a fishing village south of
It's in
Dublin,
Ireland,
about an
yeah.
hour. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they call it the sunny southeast of Ireland because it is the sunniest, part of Ireland.
Which means,
put
by
that
the
in
way,
context. Yeah.
yeah, it gets maybe like 15 minutes of sunshine a day if you're lucky.
Right. But it's a beautiful place. It's a really exquisite opera house. It's about 770 seats. It's all wooden. It's a really special place. And of course, the people really are the icing on the cake. So I was invited to lead it there. And originally it was slated to be a production by Jim Robinson that they were doing at Santa Fe in the summer or two before that. And that didn't pan out. And so David Agler, who at that time was the artistic director in Wexford, hired a really, really wonderful director named Rodula Gaetano, who's a Greek-born, Paris-educated, now English-landed director. And it was our first time working together, and we just hit it off. She is one of my most favorite collaborators in the world. And there are numerous reasons for that. One of them being is that she's a superb musician herself. She comes from a musical family, opera singer parents. She played violin to a very, very high level, was in the Greek National Youth Orchestra. And so she really has serious musical chops. And of course, for me, that's my favorite kind of director with whom to work, right? Who really deeply understands the music, not just from a shape or texture standpoint, but really can get into the score with you from a dramatic standpoint. And so we really hit it off immediately and did this production that is very, very beautiful. I cannot wait for your audience to experience it. It's not extravagant, but it is very gorgeous. And what is great about the production and the way that Rodula directed it, getting to this, psychology references, is she really directs it more like a Chekhov play. And this is one of the reasons for our rehearsal period. We were very specific that everyone needed to be there on the first day, right? And because it really has to bond together as an ensemble. It's a deeply psychological piece. There are a lot of unanswered questions in the piece that have to be addressed. I'm not saying solved, but at least addressed among the creators. And all of this in the scope of a neo-romantic opera that has ensembles, amazing arias, duets, trios, chorus scenes.
Right.
So you get all of this really intense psychological drama wrapped up in a fairly traditional through composed opera setting.
Yeah.
And so I just love it. I think the orchestration is genius. I adore the piece, and that production in Wexford is one of my top artistic memories of my career. And 2 years later, Rodula and I did a new production of Massenet's Don Quixote together, which was also wonderful. But this Vanessa really sticks in there for me, I think, especially as American Conductor,
Right.
as a real piece. So I'm thrilled to be coming back to it. And of course, to be renewing this production from Wexford in 2016 is a real pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, the production, I saw this production with Sarah.
That's right.
You know, we went to Wexford to see this production in 2016. And it almost, so I know Vanessa well. I love Samuel Barber. I've seen a production of it at the opera, the Palais Garnier in Paris. And I kind of fell in love with Barber at this time. This must have been like, I think at around the same time you did the New York City Opera, or shortly before then, maybe like between 2004 and 2006, something like that. And I fell in love with Barber's music. So it was like the violin concerto, the
Yeah.
cello sonata.
The
I mean, everybody
essays.
just, of course, the essays, you know,
Yeah.
Knoxville, summer 1915. Everybody just knows Samuel Barber, Medea, that's the ballet. Everybody just knows Samuel Barber as, you know, the composer that wrote the Adagio for strings, thanks to Platoon. And yeah, that's a gut-wrenching, like incredible piece of just sustained suspensions throughout the piece, which is why it has this kind of real plaintive quality to it. But Vanessa is like kind of psychologically harrowing in a modern twist, in a 20th century twist, but wrapped in the gauze of a neo-romantic, almost 19th century opera.
Right.
And you know, this production itself, and also let's be completely frank, there's something kind of COVID appropriate about it, since it's sort of within the heightened sense of being in one's home throughout the entirety of the opera in
Right.
one's manor home.
That's right.
But this specific production kind of added a new layer, because it looked and felt like an Ingmar Bergman film. It
Yes.
looked and felt like you have this kind of richness but sadness, this plaintiveness. And to me, the way the production looks and feels in this incredible manor country home, you know, where, you know, these paintings are being uncovered throughout, you know, the length of the opera, where you have this incredible sense of figuration and a home that looks like it's been preserved from the 18th or 19th centuries. It really fits in Charleston. There's something
Yeah.
very Charlestonian about its feel. So that's one of the reasons why we thought about it in terms of connecting it with this specific festival, and why we wanted to think about it in terms of Rodula's production, how she centers that female perspective and gives it that kind of extra psychological component.
Yeah. It's a really interesting it's an interesting thing to think about how, I mean, the opera is titled Vanessa, but the character of Erica is really so critical and really the one around which a lot of it revolves, right? Especially a lot of the psychological part of it.
Right.
And so there's a tremendous amount of depth in the characters, and that's another thing that I love about it. It's not a massive cast where you're trying to track all of these things, right? It's a very focused story.
Il Trovatore. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Where at the end of the opera are like, did they throw the baby in the fire? Who knows? What happened?
Right, yes, come
totally
again?
confused,
Yeah. Wikipedia on the way home. No, but this is, because you can really get into the midst of the story really easily, and the characters. In fact, it's interesting, I have a little anecdote about that role, Erica, if we have a minute. When I covered this at New York City Opera, the old Baroness part was sung by Rosalind Elias, who was the original Erica in the world premiere at the Met. And so it was really fascinating to do the piece with someone who had done it 50 years before and had created now what's one of the most iconic mezzo-soprano roles, and especially the aria in the repertoire. And to really learn about the process of creating the piece with Samuel Barber. And there's a great Erica has this really beautiful aria very early on in the opera, right in the first scene, called "Must the Winter Come So Soon," which is now, we sometimes joke, this is kind of what, the mezzo national anthem, right?
Yeah, you hear it at every audition.
Yeah, exactly. So, but there's a great story about that aria that Roz told us one day in rehearsal, and that when they were rehearsing for the premiere at the Met, all of the other characters, including ones that are arguably in smaller roles than Erica, had arias, including the doctor and everyone. And Vanessa has several, and so she went to the general manager of the Met, who at that time was Rudolph Bing, and she said, "Mr. Bing, I'm so grateful for this opportunity, and that you're taking a chance on a young singer for this role. But I do have a question, and it just seems a little odd that everyone else, all of the other major characters in the opera, have an aria except me." And he looked at her, and he picked up his phone, and he dialed a number, and someone answered, and he said, "Hi, Sam? Yeah, it's Rudy. Roz is here. She wants to talk to you," and hands her the phone. And so she laid out her case to Mr. Barber and said what she had said to Mr. Bing, and very respectfully, I love this role. I love the opera. I'm just wondering if you would consider writing an aria for Erica in. And he agreed, and that's how we have "Must the Winter Come So Soon."
I love the flexibility of Samuel Barber. It kind of reminds me of this other story that I heard when he was writing his violin concerto. So it's a great story, Tim, actually. I mean, and also to kind of hear it from Roz herself is pretty spectacular. But he was commissioned to write a violin concerto for the ward of Samuel Fells, who was a pretty well-known industrialist in Philadelphia. Samuel Barber writes, the first and second movement and gives it to Mr. Fells's ward, or sort of, I guess, adopted son even more. And this person was a wunderkind violinist from Curtis, so on and so forth. And so the first two movements of this piece are soaring Barberesque, melodies that, sorry, I have to fix my earpiece. Soaring Barberesque melodies that are very neo-romantic, so on and so forth, with these long, kind of incredible, over-the-bar melodies. Brahms-esque, kind of rebelling against the tyranny of the bar line. And he gives it to the violinist. Violinist plays it, and then, a couple of days later, Barber gets a phone call from Samuel Fells and says, my ward played your piece. It's great, but he thinks it's too easy. So, can you make the third movement a little harder? And so Samuel Barber writes this scherzo that he knows that the ward has problems with double stops on the second and fourth finger, probably because he was 11 years old and his hands weren't big enough.
Sure, it wasn't developed enough. Yeah,
he just goes crazy with this final movement and gives it to Samuel Fells, and it's actually too difficult for the poor kid to play.
Yeah. Be careful what you wish for if you go after a composer, right?
That's right.
That movement is a beast. I remember the first time I ever did it. Boy, it's a breathless several minutes.
Yeah, it goes on and on and on. That's true. It's kind of sort of perpetual movement. It's that type of thing. So, what do you have to say about Vanessa, and specifically this production in this festival? I mean, you had a little bit of a taste of Spoleto in 2022, but how do you think the festival format actually helps us understand these incredible American pieces that are, canonic in their own right. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I think the first very clear thing is the Menotti connection, right? I mean, is strong. With the name of when I was there, I took a photo of the street sign behind the office there, that's named after him. But so I mean, that's obviously a very clear connection. Um, I think as far as the festival format, and specifically Spoleto being a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary festival, is very, very interesting. Um, this is, as I was mentioning, the piece is very, very psychological, very theatrical, and so it's not one of these pieces that's sort of, let's say, I mean, how, Bohème, right? Which I know you did last season, which is something that is very, very, kind of hard on the sleeve. And I don't say that in a pejorative way at all. I love conducting Puccini. Um, but, there's sort of a lot of spectacle to it, right? Even in some of the smaller moments, it's really heightened. I think something like Vanessa works really well because there is this great theatrical component, and it really has to be an ensemble cast that's well directed, well led musically, so that you really mine all of the bits out of Barber's score and Menotti's libretto. And I do think that from a craft standpoint, it is as good of a piece as Bohème.
Yeah.
And so I think for a festival where there's a lot of different activity going on, this is a really good fit because there's a lot of crossover in sort of what one might find in the sort of Chekhovian, vibe that something like Vanessa has, that really fits in a multidisciplinary festival.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, it's kind of cool to start to draw together all these different threads between these different pieces. I mean, we have a lot in this festival in 2023 that has to do with underrepresented perspectives, especially female perspectives, and centering that on our stage. I think there's definitely it's responding to a degree to a social and cultural moment. We do have one question for you. We're going to start giving you some questions from the Q&A. So please write your questions into the little chat bar there, and we'll bring them up to Tim. So the question is, who or what is currently inspiring you artistically? Now, of course, apart from me, who or what is inspiring you artistically?
It's my children.
Yeah, that's good.
I have a 5-year-old daughter who just started kindergarten and a 3-year-old son. And having children has been incredibly inspirational to me artistically because you get to see the process of discovery in such a pure form. And I consider I'm an insatiably curious person and a lifelong learner. But to get to really watch my children discover these things, and my daughter just started kindergarten and she's started playing violin, and it just, in the concertmaster in Atlanta is a wonderful concertmaster in Man, and he would come by my dressing room before every performance just to check in. And so my daughter Lila, my children were there on Sunday for the matinee. I mean, let's be honest, they were there for 20 minutes of the matinee on Sunday. We put them in the very back by a door. But they were in my dressing room before, and the concertmaster came by, and I introduced them and mentioned that Lila had started playing the violin, and who he was, and I had taken them down to the orchestra pit so they could see it, and she just started talking to him just on and on, and he was asking questions about, oh, are you doing this on the instrument yet, and this and that, and she would say, well, not this but that, and it was just for her to meet someone like that, and just all of a sudden have that, that transference from her in kindergarten, picking up an instrument and starting to see what it feels like to play it and what it sounds like and to create a sound, and then to speaking to someone who has done it for a long time and who's an expert at it. It was an incredible moment to watch her just blossom
Mm.
in that environment. And so I'm really super inspired by my kids and watching them learn and just take in everything, be honest and true about their emotions and
Mm.
the way they feel about something, the way they see the world has really brought me a sense of presence that
That's yeah.
has enhanced my artistry in a way I can't even begin to encapsulate.
That's so cool. I mean, I'm with you there 100%. I can't I Lila's a bit older than Hugo is.
Hmm.
But Hugo at 2.5, he's even like doing these weird theatrical things. He takes his hand as a microphone and he sings and he makes
Yeah.
up these songs. And I'm like, where is he getting this from? I mean,
Yeah.
he doesn't go to Spoleto Festival concerts. He doesn't go to concerts with me and Sarah. He doesn't go to the theater with us. He's too young. It's somehow innately in him, which, by the way, actually leaves me crippled with anxiety and fear because I want him to go into the hard sciences. I'm
Right.
like, Hugo, please go be an epidemiologist, go into marine biology, help save our dying planet, do something.
Right.
Just don't go to the stage. But
No.
he's got it, and he is making songs up. So yeah, that's
No,
funny.
it's funny with Lila. I think Henry, he's 3. He sings a lot when
Yeah.
he hears songs, and he loves that. But Lila, it's very funny. She is playing violin now, but for the last couple of years, she really wants to be a rock musician,
Mm.
and so she's obsessed with the idea of being a singer and a guitarist and a drummer. And so the last couple of years, I would just every couple of months I would say, well, Lila, would you like to play an instrument? Would you like to maybe, is there something that interests you? And I would say, would you like to play violin? No, thank you. Well, we have a really nice piano. Would you like to play the piano? No, thank you. Well, Lila, what would you like to play? Drums. And I just don't think I'm getting out of that one. I mean,
No, you're not.
we've got the violin for now, and I think that'll take for a while. But I mean, for me, I'm with you on this. Do you, it's a hard life, and there's a lot to it, and you want to protect your children at some level, but they're going to do what they want to do. And what I love about it is just them finding these manners and avenues for self-expression. Just really gets me going, and to see
Yeah.
them just bite off something and chew on it and see what it's like, and maybe go further with it, maybe go to the next thing. But
Right.
that's sort of that curiosity I just find incredibly inspiring.
So what other projects are you currently working on? That's another question we have from the audience.
So as I mentioned, I just finished Madama Butterfly at Atlanta Opera on Sunday. I have a little work travel to go and see productions, hear singers for casting that I'm doing in Austin. Next month, I actually finish another big undertaking that I've been on. This was a journey that I started a little over 2 years ago, and that is I'm finishing an executive MBA at Harvard Business School. So I will be on campus for a week next month to finish all of my coursework for that. And then I will be off to Austin in January to lead Sweeney Todd,
Oh,
which
cool. Yeah.
is another amazing piece of theater.
Gonna have to
And
come to that. Yeah.
yeah, it's again, just what a brilliant piece. We had programmed it before Sondheim passed, but this is a
Right.
really great way to pay tribute to him, and so I'm very excited about that.
I mean, Sondheim is kind of the great American composer sometimes, and I think people overlook him in that. the complexity, the emotional, the dramatic, and contrapuntal complexity of his work is just spectacular. I can go on and on about Sondheim, but I have to ask you one more question, and I think I'm getting signals from my team here that it's time to wrap up soon. Well, okay, what do you want to say about Sondheim? Just give it like 30 seconds.
Okay, I did an interview on this earlier today, so it's pretty fresh.
Okay.
It's a mistake to discount Sondheim at any level. It's incredibly complex music. It's difficult to perform. I mean, one of the last scenes of Sweeney Todd is very difficult to conduct and to sing and play and to put it all together, all of these polymeters and reprises of all these things, and the way he manages to weave it all together is just absolutely mind-blowing.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, the most academic, esoteric American composer of the 20th century, Milton Babbitt, who wrote an essay that was titled for him, partly to drum up sales and readership, Who Cares If You Listen, where he's comparing composers to effectively experimental physicists. He writes about Sondheim as if he's like the great American composer, and that he's learned so much from Sondheim. Anyway, last question to close. What was the last song you listened to? I apparently also have to answer this question.
Oh, okay. Mine is actually funny. It was this morning when I took the kids to school, and I was listening to something that came up that I found on Spotify recently. This band called Lake Street Dive, and they have this song that I like called Bad Self-Portraits. So I do like to listen to a wide variety of music. I do listen to a lot of podcasts, especially since it's a space that I'm in now, that I'm creating in. But I do listen to a broad range of music, and that happened to be, what it was this morning on the school drop-off trip.
That's a pretty good answer. I'm trying to think about the last song I listened to. I mean, normally when I'm dropping kids off, it's like Rafi. I love Rafi. He's so good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a good go-to. I mean, I've literally favorited every Rafi album in my Spotify. So when someone starts to have a meltdown, you can just boom.
No, I know. Rafi's so good. But I'm trying to think about. I did listen to Thomas Luis de Victoria's 16th century Mass Missa Magnum Mysterium today, which is way more
great workout music, right? Yeah,
I know. I wish it were like Meek Mill or something like that. I wish I could say that I was listening to like JB Smoove
Lizzo
or something.
Yeah. Oh my God.
All right.
Amazing.
I think this is it. I think we're done. We're finished here for this evening. Thank you, Tim, so much. If you couldn't tell, Tim and I are extremely close friends. I'm actually I'm actually one of Henry's godparents.
That's
so
right.
we're very, very close friends. Got to see him a couple of weeks ago when he came here to Charleston, and I absolutely adore you as a musician,
Likewise.
as a conductor, as a thinker. I think the world of you, and I'm so glad that you're part of the 2023 festival. And I would also like to thank the patrons for watching and supporting the festival and making sure that the festival stays a part of the cultural fabric, not just of Charleston and the Southeast, but of this country.
Yeah.
So
Thanks, everybody. Great to be with you tonight.
Take care. Thank you, Tim.